So tonight we have a panel representing some financing alternatives. In the first part, we're going to ask, we have three representatives of sort of professional management of money. We're going to ask them a little bit about their background and what they do and how they think about things. And then we have a couple entrepreneurs that have taken the idea of customer financing to a new level, and we're going to have them talk about how they've financed so far. And then we're just going to open it up for questions and advice. So that's the start. Why don't we start with James Geschweiler and from Common Angels.
So I get scared coming here because I was in this class a while ago, and I feel like I have to have read the case or have done the homework. And the material has changed, so what you guys were discussing earlier was new, which is good. As Joe said, I'm James Geschweiler. I am a Sloan alum. I have an MBA, so I realize that puts me as the lowest form of life on the MIT totem pole.
College starts lower.
College starts lower. Well, that's my undergraduate degree. So there you go. You would think that this panel on finance, can we turn down the volume just a little bit? This panel on finance is somehow a non sequitur to the prior one, but really finance has tremendous amount to do with people. And the main takeaway I'd like to leave with you tonight is that when you're thinking about capital for a venture, the number one thing you need to think about is aligning the capital strategy with the operational strategy. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but we get into a lot about money, and investors talk about, we do that, and there's I think a lot of investors try to be deliberately opaque, but I think it's really kind of a disservice. You need to align your incentives, and we'll talk tonight, there are a lot more choices in the market. So one choice is, I've been running this group, Common Angels, for 12 years. We're a little bit of a hybrid. We have a 70-member angel group, but we also have a $13 million venture fund that my partner and I run. We invest in software right around go-to-market. Typical round that we are involved with or leading is $1.5 million. And our mission is to try to help that entrepreneur and that team get out to market successfully with a professional investment round, with high-quality mentoring from people with experience, and then also use all our connections to help gain customers and business development relationships and employees. So we're well-organized individual finance. And it's one segment of the market. It's not a panacea. We've got some good success. Carbonite, which provides unlimited online backup for consumers and small businesses, went public in August. We've sold a few companies over the years. We've had a dozen or so total busts. 45 companies funded over the lifetime of Common Angels. We've got 24 in the portfolio right now.
Hi, thanks for indulging me while I eat.
Well, I got to also mention that Brad and I go back to when there was a Web 0.1, as I recall.
Joe was my very first lawyer. Actually, my second lawyer. My first lawyer was Gabor Garay, and when I sold my first company. But you were my first lawyer for an angel deal.
That's true.
Which was Net Genesis. So I'm Brad Feld. I went here in the 80s, undergrad and master's, and then got kicked out of a PhD program at Sloan. I started a company while I was in school, and it was self-funded business. We raised $10 because that's all we had. And we sold it 7 years later. It was profitable every month except for the first two. And part of the reason it was profitable every month after the first two was because we had no money. So we kind of did the math, and we had no more money to lose because we had none. That business ended up being one of 40 companies that got acquired by a public company over a 3-year period. We were the 6th, and I became the CTO of that company and ended up on the deal team, among other things. My job was basically to torture people, which was kind of an ideal job for an MIT grad. And during this period of time, in 1994 and 95 and 96, I made about 40 angel investments with some of the money that I'd made from the sale of the company. That's how I met Joe. Where's Yost? Where did Yost go? Oh, Yost ran away. That's how I got to know Yost, because I was one of the early judges in the 10K competition, back when it was a 10K competition. And some of the early investments I made were companies here, MIT grads, NetGenesis and Harmonix are probably two of the more visible ones. I think you've talked about, Yost had mentioned that you talked about them. So I was very involved as a young, successful entrepreneur, investing as an angel in these companies, many of which went on to raise venture capital, after having been a self-funded entrepreneur. Along the way, I moved to Boulder, Colorado. My wife grew up in Alaska. I grew up in Dallas, and she went to Wellesley.
So you compromised.
Boston wasn't home, and one day she told me she was moving to Boulder and I could come with her if I wanted to. And so I did. And I didn't know anybody in Boulder. And I continued to make angel investments with my own money, but then hooked up with a group of people from a company called SoftBank in 1996 and 1997. There were a bunch of people sort of around that era of the web. There's a team that worked for SoftBank, then myself, a guy named Rich Levendov, who still is based here at a firm, Avalon Ventures, and then Fred Wilson, Union Square Ventures, and his partner Jerry Colonna, and I were all working with this team. A bunch of stuff happened. Three of the SoftBank people plus me ended up starting a venture fund in 1997, which was a very good time to start a venture fund because it was the beginning of the ramp up of the internet bubble. We raised a $300 million fund that invested in very early stage software internet companies. We did about 30 some odd investments out of that fund, did extremely well. In 1999, we raised a $600 million fund, continued to do early stage investments, and we made about 50 or 60 investments out of that fund in 1 year. That fund did tragically poorly. And before it became a poorly performing fund, we raised a $1.25 billion fund and continued to make early stage software and internet investments, and over a period of 5 years made 100 and something investments out of that fund. That fund has ended up doing well, but 15 years later will be sort of the resolution of it. In 2006, we decided not to raise another Mobius fund as a team. Three of the other guys at Mobius and me started a new firm called Foundry Group. It was based entirely in Boulder. Mobius was primarily based in California. And two of the guys moved to Boulder. We started a firm. We raised $225 million in 2007 to do early stage software internet investing. Many of the things that are our deeply held beliefs at Foundry are either things that we thought we did well at Mobius or direct reactions to things we did really poorly at Mobius as a firm. A couple of the premises where we decided we would never grow as a firm. It would just be the four of us forever, and when we were done, we'd stop. Second is we decided we'd never have any junior people working for us. It would just be the four of us because the entrepreneurs actually wanted to work with us, not with a team of people. The next was that whenever we raised a new fund, it would be exactly the same size. So we weren't in the business of gathering more capital, but every N years raising exactly the same size fund and investing it. And then we defined how we invested in these very broad thematic frame of reference, which allowed us to spend almost no time on things that we weren't going to invest in. So sort of a very clear strategy that had a very strong no filter on the front end. And if it came through the no filter, then we went very, very deep on just things that had a high probability of being interesting to us. We did about 30 investments out of that fund. The most notable one is Zynga, which most people know about. We were the first investors there, but we've had several other very large outcomes. A company called AdMeld, which Google bought last year for about $400 million. And we subsequently raised another fund in 2010. Anybody know how big that fund was? $225 million, exactly the same size. Apparently, I was told the first time ever in the history of venture capital that a firm said they were going to raise the same size fund and then actually did, versus raising more money. And we continue to do what we do. So that's me.
And I should just point out that Brad has a very good blog, and he's tried to be very transparent on a lot of things that entrepreneurs care about. So if you have questions, I often go to see what Brad said about it. Is just Feld.com?
Yeah, it's Feld.com. I guess three other quick data points. One is I've written two books, one called Do More Faster, which is in Joe's hand. I don't sign it even.
Do I get a commission?
Well, since I make nothing on each of the books, I think I make like 72 cents on each book. So.
Okay.
I then wrote a book with my partner Jason Mendelson called Venture Deals, Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Venture Capitalist. And anybody who's doing an early stage venture financing, that's sort of come out of the blog. And then how many of you are familiar with the program called Techstars? Heard of Techstars? About half? Pretty good. So I co-founded Techstars in 2006 with David Cohen, who's the guy that runs Techstars, and have been very active and continue to be very active. That's actually where I was just before this, and helping essentially with very, very early stage companies, kind of going through that pre-seed funding process through a structured accelerator and ending up getting funded.
Okay, excellent. And Amir Nishat from Polaris Ventures.
Thanks, Joe. Polaris Venture Capital is a pretty traditional venture firm. Actually went through many of the cycles and descriptions that Brad gave about the ups and downs of the industry. We were essentially started in the mid-90s from another venture capital firm, Burrig and Deliage, and the history of venture, 70s, 80s, and into the early 90s was that most of these venture firms, and there weren't that many of them, there were maybe 100 or so venture firms through the 80s. They kind of invested in everything, and that was the mantra. As the industry ramped up, as Brad described, the funds got bigger, and many more people came in, specialization started to occur. We have tried to avoid that. So through the 6 funds that we've raised to date, we essentially always do about a third of the investing in things that we consider to be interesting but reasonably safe. And our hope is that that third can essentially double or triple, and then it allows us to, with 2/3 of the money, invest in very speculative things, both in the life sciences and in the non-life sciences technology areas. So we, try to diversify as much as humanly possible. And on the early side, we try to fund companies with very, very small amounts of money, and have created a couple of different communities to try to do that. A notable one here in Boston is Dogpatch Labs, which cohabitates with Techstars, and I think gets a lot out of the Techstars community actually. Yeah, it's and kind of opened our eyes to the fact that a lot of entrepreneurs really want to take entrepreneurship very seriously, and being in an environment that treats them with respect and with seriousness is actually really what the Techstars model was. Has really been the mantra there. And then, we'll go all the way to the other side. We'll invest $50-60 million in a company that has profitability and, steady growth. What we've also tried to do in the other history of venture capital, in addition to raising bigger funds and also raising smaller funds, the other thing that's common in venture capital, successive fund to fund, is people get kicked out. And typically what happens is the fracture lines are between investment groups. So what you find is that the life science guys have a hot hand for a little while, and then they look at their tech partners that don't have a hot hand and tell them to get lost, only to find out that they wish they hadn't a couple years later. And so that's a very common theme. So what we have done at Polaris is essentially, encourage everybody to share in each other's areas. So I'm a life science investor, a biotech investor. I'm an MIT grad. I'm an engineer, so I come from this community, and mostly did bioengineering in Bob Langer's lab growing up, but most recently started a company with a professor in chemistry in the energy space, a guy named Dan Nocera. I helped run the company for a while with Dan, so it taught me a lot about the ins and outs of energy. So when my partners that are in Enertech deals are having, troubles or issues, I know firsthand at what they're going through because I had to deal with it as the CEO of Dan's company. I started a consumer product company with a couple of other professors. It's in the beauty space. I now know how hard it is to generate revenues and keep generating revenues on a consistent basis. So I have a lot of empathy for my partners that have EBITDA, and the same thing is true the other direction. And so we try to create, not essentially, try to create cohesivity in the partnership so it doesn't fracture. Our investors are pretty standard mix of universities, pension funds, the usual mix of limited partners for venture capital, and I think we're pretty unconspicuous in that regard. We have been pretty dedicated to being national from the beginning. So we used to have an office in Seattle when everybody thought Seattle would be a good place for entrepreneurship. That office, which we had started the firm with that office in mind, we've actually moved down to San Francisco. We've always had a presence here in the in New England. I think we will always do that. We've steadily kind of moved down into New York a little bit with a toe in the water there. But generally speaking, we try to be national if we can, and invest all across the country. Yeah, so Dogpatch, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I think you'd be curious to know what the inspiration behind Techstars was. You know, my friend and, you know, former partner, Mike Hirschland, actually had made this observation when he had first started to spend a lot of time in San Francisco. He'd made this interesting observation that a lot of his friends who were entrepreneurs who didn't need space or anything were asking him if they could hang out where he had rented some space. And then as he started to watch other entrepreneurs want to hang out together, what he realized fundamentally was that, you know, an entrepreneur, if you're trying to start your idea and it's not yet fully formed, you essentially are either going to be in a Starbucks or you're going to be in your kitchen. And, you know, you tend to come from a pretty high performance environment. Most of us are pretty competitive and, you know, want to do well. And it's not that easy to do that in your kitchen or in Starbucks. So when you go into a typical Dogpatch, what we have tried to create is an environment, almost like a fraternity in a way, where we provide the obvious things like food and, you know, water and coffee and beer and rent. But the more unobvious thing is we try to filter the people coming in. And there's only one rule to get into Dogpatch, is that you have to share. So we share our network. We sit there when we can. We share everything. You know, we share whatever we can with a Dogpatch. The Dogpatch residents have to help each other. If you don't help each other, you're kicked out. And so there's an environment where people start helping each other with their ideas. They're distinct in their teams, and there's about 25 teams in each area, in each of the 4 cities we have Dogpatches in. And every 6 months we boot a few out and bring in, you know, people on the wait list. And so it's kind of a diverse environment where everybody's supposed to share their ideas to the extent possible. And it's got this kind of almost a very natural life history for our company, because when you come in, you think you're pretty interested in an area, but you haven't yet worked everything out. And entrepreneurs love to talk a lot in the early days, so they're sharing ideas with each other. But once someone kind of figures out what they want to do, you watch this almost beautiful phase transition into a phase where now they're worried that someone's going to scoop them, because they know what they want to do, they know what the idea is, and now they're trying to run like mad. And so then it becomes pretty apparent that it's time to move on, whether you found funding or whatnot. So there's this very steady kind of progression, much like Techstars, a little less formal, but I think there's steady progression of teams through there. And the environment creates this competitive dynamic where you're not competing with a guy next to you, but he just got off the phone with Pepsi, you know, some VP at Pepsi who's thinking about a partnership, and you're sitting there going, well, you know, what am I doing today? And I might be in biotech, so I better get off my butt and start calling Pfizer or whoever. So I think it just forces people to referentially start expecting more out of themselves, and they work harder, and they become very entrepreneurial. So I think that's the secret of it. And I'd love to know actually what went into the idea of Techstars.
Can we maybe hold on that for a moment? So what we have is traditional venture ranging from biotech and a larger fund to very focused things that Brad is doing. Those 2 guys, both having been entrepreneurs in the past. We have angel investing with a quasi-model of both the angel and the funds, sort of traditional sources of capital. Another classic source would be SBIR government-type grants. We don't have anybody here to talk about that tonight, but we can put some things on the website about that. And then the final thing is traditional customer financing. That is, remember how we talked about getting close to the customer? Well, sometimes the customer will actually pay you. And that's always a hard one to find, to have someone come in and really talk about. This year we have sort of an interesting model with David and John, who have just done some unique customer financing through Kickstarter. Now, I could run the videotape that's on Twine if you want.
How about we talk about ourselves or just introduce ourselves?
Yeah, why don't you do that? Go ahead.
All right, I'm David Carr. I'm a recent grad of the Media Lab. I guess last time this year I was just starting to figure out what my master's thesis was going to be, and that was really, really scary. So if anybody's going through that right now, I feel your pain. And this is John. We together started a company called Super Mechanical, which we'll get to in just a second, but just tell you a little bit about where I came from. I'm an electrical engineer by training. I went to undergrad at Rice a while back now, 2000 and something, 6 or 7. And then I went to work to ExxonMobil at a big, cog in the machine kind of job at this big company, and did that for a couple years, and then finally I got tired of processes and business reports and all that stuff, and I decided to come back to the Media Lab because that was a good way to kind of jar myself out of the corporate world and back into a place where I got to think a little bit more. And John and I met at the Media Lab. don't know if we ever actually collaborated on a project, but we ended up talking a lot about each other. We found out we had some really complementary interests and skill sets. And so after we graduated from the lab, John was done a year before we decided to start this company, Super Mechanical. And it was sort of, I guess it's the ultimate organic thing in that we said, oh, we're going to start a company together, and we don't know what it's going to do. But I like you, and you're a good guy, and even to this day, we don't actually have any like binding documents between us, I guess. I mean, I guess we're both on the LLC, but you know, like nominally we both have half of the equity in our company, but you know, I could shoot him, and if you guys didn't record this conversation, I could say own the whole thing. But yeah, so we've actually gone through a couple things, a couple different product cycles, getting to where we are now with our product right now is called Twine, which we'll talk about in just a second. And I'll let John introduce himself, and we'll kind of delve into that a little bit.
Howdy, I'm John Kessner. So my background's in industrial design, product design, interaction design. I also worked as a cog in a big machine. It was a machine called U-Haul, and I made their website. Yeah, they actually didn't have a website before I started there. So that was a really fun thing to do until they all kind of noticed that a website was kind of important and got involved, but not before I grew it to a pretty cool and big thing and added all sorts of stuff for like a dealer intranet and $1 million eBay of moving help kind of thing. But yeah, I got bored of that too and kind of just took on interesting projects, and then eventually found myself at the Media Lab and you know, kind of played with cool new interfaces for the future, and that kind of naturally led to the seed of this stuff that David and I were working on.
Alrighty, so John and I, first thing we did together was this project called the Rev Table. I don't know if anybody ever heard of the Rev Table or not, but the Rev Table was like 3 months of really hard work. You know, we had some other cool ideas that we were working on, but we wanted to like get something into the market quickly just so we could start get a little revenue stream going. You know, that's important when you don't have any money per se. And so we decided we were going to design furniture, because how hard can it be to design furniture? And we had this really cool idea about furniture that the actual blueprints for the furniture should be embedded in the object itself. So like it kind of like lives forever and you can customize it. And we designed this cool way where we could take the entire CAD files for like a table and embed them in a QR code on the surface of the table. So the entire file was there. It wasn't a link, it was actual like the data. And so we designed this thing, we put it up on our website, we got some cool press, and nobody bought one. I think probably a month in, somebody tried to buy one from us, and at that point we sent them an email. We're like, I'm sorry, we're not going to make this because we have to make a minimum number of these things, and there's no way I'm going to sell the other 9, you know? So that was sort of a lesson for us, and we went back to the drawing board, and we thought really hard about all the ways that we had screwed up. And we can talk a little bit more about why we were successful in Kickstarter, I think. And I think the reasons that we were successful in Kickstarter were all the reasons that we weren't successful with this first thing, is we did all of those things wrong. And we'll get back to that in a second. But so we created this new thing called Twine. And Twine is it's a little rubber brick that's connected to the internet. And it's sort of part of a very vertical platform where you have this little AAA powered wireless brick that you can plug in a bunch of different kinds of sensors to. It has some sensors on the inside. And we marketed it in a really consumer-centric fashion. So we wanted you to not just be like a tech enthusiast, like you like soldering and programming. And in fact, we tried very hard to not use the word programming at all when we described it. It's designed if you're like more of like if you like to play golf, or you have a fish tank, or you know, you're just like somebody who really wants to know what time the mail gets delivered. We have lots of people who are interested in that for some reason. We wanted to make it possible for you to basically connect your mailbox or your fish tank or whatever it was in your life to the internet. So we designed this really simple web-based platform where you go on there and you plug your Twine in and it says, oh, here's your Twine, and oh, I see you have a moisture sensor plugged into it. So you can make a rule that says something like, when the moisture sensor gets wet, send me a tweet that says your basement is flooding. And it's really, really straightforward to do that. We'll show a video in a second. It kind of shows you what the whole platform looks like. So we decided we sort of did this, and I guess we can be honest. Most of what we put on our Kickstarter was smoke and mirrors. We sort of did some initial feasibility work to make sure that we thought we could build this thing, and kind of guessed how much it would cost, and then figured out like what is the absolute minimum amount of funding that we could have to actually pull this off. Turns out we vastly underestimated. And then we decided to just post it on Kickstarter, and we posted it right before Thanksgiving, and we did that because honestly, my parents were like, what are you doing with your life? Like, you have like a master's degree from MIT, and you're like sitting around in your basement, in your kitchen, you know, doing stuff, but it doesn't really look like you're making any money. So I put it on Kickstarter right before Thanksgiving because when they came for Thanksgiving, I wanted to show them that somebody at least cared about what we were doing. And so that was like 3 days later, we asked for $35,000, and I think on Thanksgiving we had just crossed the 100K mark. And by the time it was all over, 42 days later, what was the final total, John?
$541.
Yeah, $1,000. So $500,000. Yeah.
And David, what was the price, just to get an idea what the unit?
So we
volume is?
offered it's Kickstarter. If you're not familiar with it, raise your hand if you know what Kickstarter is. I'm curious. Okay, some people. So Kickstarter is a crowdfunding platform. Basically, you take an idea and you make a video about it, and you it's sort of like blackjack. You pick how much money you want and how long you have to get it, and then you either get that amount of money or you don't. And people go on Kickstarter and they say, oh, these guys look cool and they have a nice idea. I'm gonna like pledge $99, which was like the most basic. You could get a single twine for $99. And then there's a couple of different levels. We had one at like 125 and 165, and then we had, you know, if you really wanted to go out, you could pledge 500 and get two. So basically, people just who were going to be our customers and people who were excited about our product came in, pledged, you know, $99 or $165 at a time. We got all the way up to almost or more than $500,000. It took about almost 5,000 people. I think we have 4,966 individual people who backed us, and in 42 days. And it was a very, very crazy ride. You answer tons and tons and tons of emails from people who are interested, but it's really exciting to see all these people who are excited about your product, so much so that they'll give you money right now on basically no guarantees that you're going to end up delivering anything at all. You get the money up front as soon as it's over, so they just cut you a check. It was a really great adventure for us, and I guess let's show the video now. We'll talk a little bit more about it.
You want to show the one that's directly on Kickstarter?
Which one do you want to do? Let's watch the Kickstarter video. You'll get a flavor for what it's like and how nervous we were at the time. We spent the last couple of years at the MIT Media Lab developing new technologies that connect objects and humans in a more natural way. Unfortunately, developing new connected interfaces can be really difficult. So we created Twine to make it easy. No matter whether you're a tech enthusiast, DIY type, or a creative thinker, we all start on the same plane. You don't know how to program or to solder. So really, Twine teaches objects how to speak, and you just have to tell them what to say.
Twine is the simplest way to connect stuff to the internet. It's a durable 2.5-inch square that listens to its environment and relays what it senses over Wi-Fi. It runs for months on batteries. Sensors to detect vibration and temperature are built in. You can also plug in other sensors like a moisture sensor or a magnetic switch. If you're more adventurous, you can plug in your own analog or digital inputs with the breakout board. Twine can tell you what your sensors are saying using SMS, Twitter, and email. Or for more control, hook it into your code with HTTP.
This is the web app that lets you tell Twine what to do. It's tightly integrated with the hardware, so you can see your Twine shows up along with the built-in accelerometer and temperature sensors. Now, if you want to plug in an external sensor, like this easy button, you just take your Twine, plug it in like this. The button shows up immediately, and even cooler, it's live. So you can see your sensors responding to stimuli. Now, this allows you to set up your Twine with no programming. It's a rules-based interface, simple language. So you can say, when button 1 goes down, then text, turn on the AC in here. If you want to do something more complicated, like tie in the temperature sensor, then you add a filter. And let's say I want to say when temperature is also above 72 degrees. So now, when button goes down while temperature is above 72 degrees, then text, turn on the AC in here. So David and I are really proud of the work we've put into Twine.
We think the Twine concept is simple, but the implementation is really difficult. We spent the last few months making working prototypes, and now it's time to take the next step into manufacturing. To produce Twine in quantity, we need to buy tooling, parts, and supplies. Kickstarter, with your support, we can make Twine the finished product that we want it to be.
Thanks.
All right, So that's what we did to raise $500,000. And I can talk I'll talk a little bit about what I think is really successful, what you have to do to be successful on a crowdfunding platform like Kickstarter. But I think we're going to have a question and answer thing, so I'll leave a little bit for that so you guys can ask more questions about parts you think are interesting. So I think the things that we did wrong with RevTable were we weren't really sure exactly what we were building and who it was for. So like we built this thing, it was sort of like a piece of fine furniture. I mean, we used like solid walnut, we used like real steel made in the United States. We had it like, we're gonna powder coat it so it would last a really long time. And then, to kind of add to that quality, we were gonna make it, live forever. Like if the leg ever broke in the future, you could like get the plans and have somebody make you a new leg that was exactly like the original one. But the thing about that was sort of like two markets we were playing with there, one of which was people who are into like fine furniture are willing to spend a fair amount of money for something they think is going to last a long time. And the other one was that this sort of techie QR, like the plans are in it, sort of appealed to this more kind of maker, tech kind of oriented person who didn't usually have, they're usually like a lot younger and they didn't have as much money to spend. We were charging like about $500 for this table. And so it wasn't really, it was kind of a confused product. And I think that was one of the biggest shortfalls. The idea wasn't cool, although I don't think it was really as honed as it could have been. So what we did was we went back and we actually designed this thing called Twig before we designed Twine. And Twig was going to be like the solution to everything. It was going to be like, it could do input, it could do output, it could do like all this fancy logic on the device. It was going to be like a programming language, except you weren't going to have to program it. And we did all this, like, we spent a couple months, like, developing prototypes in the language and all this other kind of stuff. And we had this giant, like, wall-sized whiteboard where we drew everything. One day I went and I was like, there's no way in heck we're ever going to build this thing. And so I went and slept, and the next day I brought a big red marker and I just started drawing red lines through blocks of this entire block diagram until there was only like 3 pieces left. And I was like, John, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build a minimum twittering object. It's going to be like, that's all it can do. And John was like, oh my God, I'm freaking out. What is David doing? And so it turns out, though, that John slept on it too. And we kind of came to think that really there's one thing that we wanted to do, and we wanted to make it possible to connect X to the internet. Because I think that if you think about things that are really powerful today, a lot of them are really connected devices. I mean, like the reason my iPhone is useful is because it's connected. It's not because it has a really nice interface. It's because I can check my email on it. And if you're in, on vacation and your heater breaks and your house gets to like 22 degrees and all your pipes start to blow up, it'd be really awesome if your pipes were connected to the internet so you would know about that before you came home and your house is full of water or something like that. So really the idea was just to connect stuff to the internet. And we thought about who the market was. And so for us, we kind of thought about it almost like concentric circles or onions or something. Like that we figured the easiest people to sell something like this would be like the kind of core tech enthusiasts, the kind of people who would buy an Arduino and a Wi-Fi shield because they already bought this stuff. And we tried to price it so that it was about the same price as an Arduino and a Wi-Fi shield. So that's like the worst we could possibly do is to match that. But we kind of realized too that if we thought about the size of that market, it's a pretty big market. But if you were to like go a layer up above that, people who are not just like soldering and programming enthusiasts, but just like people who read Engadget and like to post on Engadget, those people are interested in technology, but a lot of them can't program or, wouldn't know how to design a circuit or something like that. And that's probably another 10 or 100 times more than the people who can program Arduino. And then if you go another stacked layer above that, there's people who don't even care about Engadget. Maybe they have a smartphone and they think that's nifty. But, really, they like to play golf, or they have fish, or they, have a yacht or a vacation house, or, maybe it's not something that costs a lot of money, but it's just like a lot bigger slice of humanity. And we tried to think about how we could start penetrating up into these other markets that weren't the traditional market for a piece of technology. And so that really kind of factored the way that we designed the object and thought about it. And I think if we go through that video, like if we were to do that, we could show you all the different elements in that video where we tried to shape what you saw to appeal to someone who is not only at that very core, who we thought would be the initial market, but the places that we were trying to grow into. And for example, you notice it's like a piece of rubber. You can't see a circuit board. It's designed to not look like a piece of kind of like electronic jewelry, like my iPhone. My iPhone's glass and shiny and like it looks fragile. And so this thing is a rubber block, and I really think you probably could throw it down on the ground. It wouldn't hurt it. And it uses AAA batteries instead of a LiPo, not only because of cost, but because a lot of people understand AAA batteries. They don't ask, oh, how do you charge it? Oh, I just put new batteries in it. That's not a big deal. And we didn't really want you to think about electronics, so it doesn't look like electronics. It uses a headphone connector, which is probably the most recognizable connector out there, maybe next to a power plug, because no one is afraid of headphones. Oh, if I plug this new USB device in my computer, it might not work, but no one is really afraid of plugging headphones into something. Oh, there's a headphone port, let's jam this in, we'll see what happens, And so that's kind of the same feeling I wanted you to have. And John is, I should say this, I'm an engineer by training, John is an industrial designer, so I'm taking a lot of his thunder here, but I hope to think that I'm slowly becoming steeped in this art of design. Yeah. But, and finally, the web platform, we tried to make it as application-like as possible. I wanted you to be able to read what you had set up when the basement floods, send me an email, and understand what it was, even if you're like my mom, who has to call me every time she has to figure out what her wireless network password is, or wants to print something on both sides of the page, So that's the sort of people that we wanted to make possible. And in doing so, I think what we've done is we tried to build a community that was going to show us thinking one step beyond Kickstarter. Why is connecting stuff to the internet useful? If you think about, there's this Internet of Things buzzword, and it's kind of a big thing in tech right now, but no one really knows what to do with it. There's a lot of industrial applications, very narrow, oh, I got a bunch of buildings and I want to monitor the temperature, and that's fine if you're a permit company or you're or MIT and you care about the temperature in buildings. But if you're a consumer, nobody knows why consumers are going to buy connected toasters or, light switches or basements or whatever they are. And so we wanted to have this broader audience so that our early adopters could actually show us what the applications were. We wanted it to be open-ended. We didn't give specific examples in the video, you notice. And the reason for that is I didn't want to constrain you to think about it in a particular way. We actually made a version of the video that does have specific examples, and when I was watching it, we were like, oh, that's boring. Let's get rid of all that specific stuff. We'll just kind of make it vague. And that's really spurred people's imaginations. And there are so many different applications we can talk about that people are going to use it for. And I think that just shows that we did a really great job of being vague enough that these people could visualize it in their own terms. And some of those, hopefully, will be the really powerful markets to come in the consumer Internet of Things space, is by having a broad slice of customers. You can see, they'll show you where you should go next. So that's
one of the classic things is the customers like what you're doing, and so you've actually got customers. Now the question is, are you going to need additional financing?
Sure.
And I sort of would open it up to the professionals. What kind of questions? What do you think? Any comments?
Actually, let me add one more thing for you.
Okay.
Sorry. One other thing that's really neat about crowdfunding like Kickstarter is people are excited about what you're doing and being a part of making it real. I would say anywhere between 10 and 20% of people actually gave us more money than we asked for. So if you pledge at the $99 level, maybe they'll give you $120. And they're like, oh, that's just an extra $20 for that beer when you're up really late one night working on this thing. Or they just do something. They we had to know what wireless routers to test with, and I was trying to find out what are the top 10 wireless routers in the US. And I found this company would sell me a report for $100. And I was like, you know what we can do? I just sent out a survey to our Kickstarter backers and asked them what brand of wireless router they have and what model. And in 2 hours, I think we had more than 1,000 responses. That's of what brand of wireless router. And it wasn't just the US, it was the people that backed our project. I mean, they are really willing to go out of their way to help you and to promote it. And so I wanted to add that before we get into the rest.
Any comments from our investors? How you think about this? What do you?
Well, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing yet. I think it's a great case study, and back to this comment about diversification. Amir and I did this panel 5 years ago, something like that, and the world was a different place. It was a little bit more segmented. There were fewer choices, and as Joe said at the beginning of the introduction, to the Kickstarter story here, well, now Kickstarter exists, and you can have, quote, customer financing. I just wanted to take 1 second, abstract this a little bit, talk about principles, and then I do have a couple specific questions. First is that anybody who's, and this is not the legal technical term, but an investor in your company, right, or your endeavor, is someone who's sharing the risk and return with you. So you can think about that kind of broadly. Sometimes it's customers. They may not get a product. They might not get what they expected. It might take longer. It might be people who furnish capital. There might be someone who's risking their career to join you. It might be a partner who's willing to co-sell. So there's really only one thing that makes the entrepreneur an entrepreneur. It's not innovation. I realize that's heretical in this place to say that, but it's not. And entrepreneurs don't have unique claim to innovation. There are other people who innovate. There are faculty members, professors, inventors, big companies. What makes the entrepreneur unique is they're creating a new organization to capitalize on innovation. So they're creating this new entity that is better structured than anything else before in order to do that. So point one is, in finance, we really have the same burden. We have to change our organization. So maybe our change is a promise of consistency, which is actually a change of the past. Sometimes it's to become bigger or smaller with the market. Sometimes it's to change structure. Sometimes it's to create crowdsourcing funding. But one of the things that I really like about Amir's story is Dogpatch. I don't think you gave Dogpatch enough credit. Dogpatch, I mean, I hope everyone realizes, was this incredibly controversial and bold act, because the Boston community in particular used to be incredibly prejudiced. Oh, Polaris is getting a call option on all these companies. Oh, if you go to Dogpatch, you're a Polaris puppy. You know, no one else is going to touch you. Oh, bad thing for the entrepreneurs. It has been this great open community that has broken down a lot of walls. And Techstars also. Techstars, by bringing mentors together and saying, let's put that first, has really created a much more open environment. So one is, we in the capital community are changing. Two, now to the organization. It's really the organization first. Capital really comes after it. So my question is, what do you want to build? What's your goal? You've got a product here. That's a first start. But is this just a product project that you're going to make work and then move on to the next thing, go be a cog in a big machine again? Do you want to change the world? What are your goals?
Yeah. So I think we want to be the people that figure out what the Internet of Things is about from a consumer perspective. We started out wanting to build a product. We came up with this idea of Twine, and we wanted to make it real. And at the end of the day, someone else wants to buy a product from you, and that's why they're going to give you their money. And if you're self-starting, then you have to kind of get to that reality a lot faster than someone who has venture backing. So you have to start by making a product that people want to buy. Otherwise, you're never going to get to year 3 in Series C, where someone can, finally make revenue. And so what we did was we started by making a product, and in the process of that, we, like you said, we blew up the first time we tried to make a product, and we learned a lot. And the first version of Twine is teaching us so much. Like, I can tell you there's no way we could have done this for $35,000. We'll spend 4 times that by the time we're done, just on, expense of people that are working on it, tooling, people, software, all sorts of things that you have to buy that you don't think about necessarily. But the fact that we have this really supportive Kickstarter community has made us able to do that at a price that's incredibly low, I think. And also it gives us a really great first round of people who care about what we're doing to test with and experiment with. And those people want to see us succeed. Those people want to buy our next product. They want to see that the product that they supported become really relevant and a luminary in the marketplace. And so we're building a company around that product now. And that company actually has a lot of objectives. We can get into that more a little bit if you want. But it sees Twine as the thing that made its existence possible. And it's using that to capitalize its early development. And we may have to have more products. We may have to have other partners. We may have to have venture funding. Lots of different sources to fund the continued growth of that company. But Twine is the product that made that company possible.
So I'll add a couple of thoughts and a story. One is my simple reaction to the experience that y'all have had and to Kickstarter in general is that it's awesome. I think that there's a thing that gets conflated as time passes. And I used to be the youngest guy in the room, and I'm not anymore, and it's a very weird feeling when there's sort of that self-recognition of it. The sort of notion of customer financing is not a new or profound notion, right? When I described my first company, we were customer financed. And the story I'll tell you is an example of sort of the extension of customer financing applied to another type of company. The phenomena that's so incredible in the context of what y'all have done and what others have done using Kickstarter, and sort of the essence of Kickstarter as a vehicle, is another example of the democratization of the internet, and sort of the way that the internet changes the nature of how things work, fundamentally from a command control, hierarchical, one up, one down type phenomena to a very broadly networked phenomena. And in the context of crowdfunding, with Kickstarter, you have 5,000 relatively small dollar supporters. To get to those 5,000 in the absence of the web, and not just the absence of the web, because in 1995, you didn't have enough infrastructure around it, you didn't have people connected, the mobile infrastructure wasn't there, performance wasn't there, the software layer wasn't there. 15 years later, 16 years later, you go from a phenomena where the amount of friction to get to 5,000 people for $100 each used to be infinity. And today it's almost zero, right? So that phenomena is what is really incredible in the context of enabling entrepreneurship, combined with the real second order effect of it. I have no idea, what's the name of the company now, Twine? Super Mechanical. I have no idea whether Super Mechanical will be a successful company or not, nor do you. And, you know, let's check back in 30 years and see. I have no idea whether the aspirations you have today for it will be achieved or not. Doesn't matter. But the amount that you learned going through the process, and how long have you been working on this? 6 months?
4 or 5.
5 months. With the third initiative, where the first and the second, the first failed, you're very articulate about why. The second, you killed, and you killed because it was too complex, and you woke up one day and you barfed all over it being too complex. And that led you to the third. I mean, that process of continual iteration, continual design development, linked to then having a market test, right? Your market test, how long did it take you to create the market test? A day?
Probably spent 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days? You create a market test where you put it up on Kickstarter, and if nobody had shown up, you would have said, okay, that sucked. And that happens to a lot of Kickstarter projects. And then there's others that exceed expectations. So that phenomena in the context of entrepreneurship is so powerful compared to what it looked like 20 or 25 years ago. And I'd encourage everybody to think about, I think fundamentally the shift is not how capital and, in terms of dynamics, I think there's second things that roll from it. I don't think it's how capital and entrepreneurs interact with each other. I don't think it's new business models. I think all of these things are extensions of phenomena that we're used to. It's this radical shift in terms of how an entrepreneur interacts with the product and the customer and the business compared to the view that existed 20, 30 years ago, planning process, hierarchical approach, multi-year view. By the way, if an entrepreneur shows up at my door today with an early stage company and says, I don't expect to have a dime of revenue until the third year and I don't really give a shit and really all I care about is getting to the Series C, I'm not interested in that either, right? I'm not interested in the company has to have revenue before it shows up, but there's no reason to elongate this dynamic, whether you use Kickstarter or your own money or no money or my money or some other vehicle. So that's a phenomenon. The story I want to tell just briefly on the back of this is about another company that came out of the Media Lab that I'm an investor in called Oblong. How many people are familiar with the company Oblong? Anybody? A couple people? How many of you have seen the movie Minority Report? And how many of you remember the Tom Cruise character interacting with a computer by pointing at it? And how many of you know that the person who created all of that has a PhD from the Media Lab? And that Steven Spielberg was inspired to do that by a trip to the Media Lab? Okay? So John Underkoffler, who is the Media Lab PhD, undergrad MIT, master's MIT also, was hired by Spielberg to translate Spielberg's view of, I have this idea about what I want 2050, I think it's 2054 to be, but I have no idea what that means. Like I can sort of describe it. Like I want cars that go up and down. but I don't really know. Like, I want computers that don't have, it just happens. And if you want to go forward or backwards through time, and so John created all of that. And he then did some other stuff. He moved to Hollywood, did some other stuff with Spielberg. If you remember the Hulk, all of the written notebooks in the Hulk, that's actually John. So not only did he write it all, but he created all of the language and all the crazy shit that the Hulk would write and scribble in his notebooks. So very, very creative entrepreneurial brain. From the mid-90s, when John was in, I don't remember which lab it was called then, it's, I think the tangible media lab, it's still the same lab. John's view was that the idea of a mouse and a keyboard as the interaction interface with the computer was stupid. And he believed that in the future, we would be different. Now, the idea that we walk down the street and pound on a piece of glass like this all day, bumping into people, and almost getting run over by a policeman today. Right? It's fucking stupid. Like, really? This is like what we've been reduced to as a society? It's so much better than what it was like when I was here, where if you wanted to use a computer, you had to carry this big thing and plop it on a desk with you, right? But, so John had this view. And from about 2002 to 2006, he and 3 other guys rented a warehouse in LA, and they got paid by Raytheon and Boeing, and I can't remember the other company, to essentially do R&D on this vision that John had as a way of them being close to this future user interface dynamic. And the first time I saw it was in 2006. I remember walking into this laboratory and, on a wall, and John puts his little gloves on, and they put the alphabet up on the wall, and he starts dragging letters from the wall to across. So grabs the A and grabs the B, and I mean, just like you walk in and you're stunned. Like, it's so obvious that this is so much of a better way to interact with the computer. And then the second thought you have is, this is so far from being a commercial product that we can use. And they were able to self-fund that business to the tune of about $1 million a year for a bunch of years, 3-4 years, as they built this fundamental core technology that still is at the base of what their products are today. But they reached a point where they decided that they could keep doing that and they could keep advancing the technology, but they were in the moment of time where raising some money would allow them to build a team that was a bigger team, to build a product that would allow them to then go to market with a product. And today they're a 100-person company. They did about 10 million in revenue last year. They'll probably do somewhere between, my guess is 30 and 40 million this year with shipping product. They'll probably double in size again. And they're executing on the vision that John had in 1995. So the point of this is that there's so many different ways to get it, but the power, the passion that you guys have in terms of this core notion, right? I mean, you're not effusive about it, but this idea of the Internet of Things and how all of the tinkering that you did up to this point created that. And now you have 5,000 people who are rooting for you, who are going to get a thing in their hand. Hopefully it'll be a good, when it shows up, hopefully we'll like it. That the second you say, okay, our next thing is this, they're back in. So you've created options for yourself using a vehicle that changes it from a hierarchy to a network. So I wanted to kind of give that perspective in those two different stories, but both are cases of having a vision, executing on a vision, iterating continually with real feedback from real customers who were interacting with you, regardless of what the financing or payment dynamics were, but having, as an entrepreneur, a trajectory that you wanted to be on. And at the point at which it makes sense to accelerate number of people ahead of maybe the revenue curve that you have, that's when guys like us really fit in terms of being able to do that. That was my reaction to the story.
Any comments, Amir?
No, just a second. Everything that's been said before, I think for myself, if you go on, I go on Kickstarter from time to time, it's addictive. I mean, there's so many cool ideas on there. And I think the other thing that is true about venture capital is that it's not the right tool for a lot of people. And I think a lot of companies went to get venture capital financing for a lot of years because there was no other way. And I think Kickstarter is another way in which people can absolutely access capital without having to be forced into a venture capital path, which again is a tool for, as Brad put it, when you need lots of money for very specific purposes. But I think you guys are doing a great job. So.
Let me add one more thing. I think we've talked to a few VCs, people started paying attention to us a little bit more, and it's been really interesting to never having gone through that process or thought about what it might be like. We've done it a half a dozen times, talked to different firms just to kind of understand what the other parts of the equation look like. And one thing that a lot of VCs will tell you is that they bring a lot of different resources to bear, and I think it's in the contact book and the experiences that they had and the people that they know and their experiences. And I think those are all really valuable things. But I think it's interesting to hear your sort of analogy about how we've taken this hierarchical system and flattened it out into a network. I'm not sure that there's complete parity, but Kickstarter has a similar network structure, and not just on the funding side. Like, once you go on Kickstarter, Kickstarter is the very best marketing platform you'll do before anybody knows who you are, I think. I mean, I think Kickstarter single-handedly, in terms of the promotional things that they sent out and the attention that they brought to our project, probably doubled the amount of funding that we generated organically. And we tried pretty hard. I mean, we were on Wired, we were on Engadget, we were on TechCrunch. I mean, we brought in a lot of different news outlets, the traditional channels, but Kickstarter is really plugged into all the right people. They sent out one email, and it netted us $65,000 in 2 days. I mean, that shows that they're plugged into the right people. And not only Kickstarter, once you're on Kickstarter, people start to see you, and the platform that Kickstarter has built has a fairly high profile, much higher profile than any startup could afford to have. And so big companies and investors and other people that you want to do business with that should be in your contact book, whether you know about them or not, will approach you directly because of this network effect of Kickstarter. And that is probably the next, you get the money up front, and that's stage one of your growth. But all these contacts that get turned up in the process and the things that you learn and the interaction with your backers, that'll be stage 2 and 3 and 4. And it's equally big, if not much bigger, than the financial input that you get.
Also, I wanted to say, I didn't even tell you this, I was talking to a guy from Kickstarter the other day because he wanted to give contact information to some reporter, and he mentioned that, they took notice in the office of us after a while, and they wanted to support us, and they were rooting for us. So it was kind of funny when you kind of think about, like, we spent a lot of our time up front before we put it up in honing a message, understanding our audience, and really kind of trying to speak to them and understanding them well. And that works on several levels because, in a sense, we are also honing our message, whether we necessarily knew it or not, for the few people who really mattered at the top of that somewhat hierarchy at Kickstarter. And we made fans of them, and they really pushed us beyond what the average might get.
So this has been a great story about how to sort of get started with the crowdsourcing. I'd like to sort of generalize it a little bit and say, ask the investor side of the panel, how do you find deals? When's the right time for people to come to you? How do you find them? Do they find you? How does it work? Any comments about how?
Sure. I mean, my guess is we have 3 probably different processes and dynamics. So maybe I'll be very good. Yeah, I'll just describe how my world works, and then. So, as I said earlier, I have 3 other partners. There's 4 of us. We all work on everything together. So we don't have any segmentation like there is at Polaris in terms of different types of focuses with overlap. We just all work on it all together. We've defined these, what we describe as themes, which we have a half a dozen or so active that are broad, fairly horizontal, fairly abstract constructs. So an example of a theme for us is human-computer interaction. The idea that we should be able to say a theme in one sentence. In 20 years, the way we interact with computers today will look archaic. We want to invest in things that are on that trajectory, changing the way that humans and computers interact. Oblong would be an example of that. We're investors in a company called MakerBot, which is a 3D printer company, the first 3D printer for $1,000. We're investors in a company called Fitbit that makes a wireless tracker, which is part of a theme we think about it as a subset of HCI called human instrumentation. The idea is that human beings will be fully instrumented within a decade at the cellular level. Another example of a theme for us is something we call glue, which in the 1980s, for those of you that remember the 1980s, was called middleware. And before that,
Not old enough.
I know. How many people, no, this is not for this audience good. I asked a question earlier today and nobody knew the answer. I was with a bunch of undergraduates today. How many people here, just raise your hand if you know the answer. If I gave you these two devices, would you know what to do with them? A pencil and a cassette tape. Okay, how many people wouldn't know what to do with the pencil and a cassette tape?
Wind the cassette
Oh, don't
tape.
tell 'em.
Oh, sorry.
I was with a half a dozen people under the age of 20. Not a single person knew, but they were all MIT grads. And within about 30 seconds, one of them, you could sort of see him saying, would you wind it? Question mark. Right? Bingo, you got it. So GLUE is machine-to-machine communication. Protocol, another theme. Companies that are built around technology protocols, SMTP, RSS, XML, et cetera. We only invest in the U.S., and we say in northern U.S., which is Canada to us. So we invest in the U.S. and Canada, nothing else. If you are not in a theme, we say no immediately. We get tens of things a day from referrals from other venture firms, random stuff inbound, stuff we bump into. If it's not in one of those themes, just no. If it's in a theme, we go extremely deep on the people and the product. It's all we care about. We know the businesses, the markets, the competitive dynamics, as well as you're gonna know them in a lot of cases, because often we're investing very early. So we're really trying to get our arms and minds around, do we believe in the product vision that the entrepreneurs have, and are we excited about it? And do we get excited about the people, and do they get excited about us? Because we really view it as a two-way street. If they don't choose us and we don't choose them, if one side misses, forget it, it's not worth it. And because all four of us work on everything together, we use a very qualitative approach. I like to say, you can be a great venture capitalist without ever using a spreadsheet, because all the math that you really have to do, you can do in your head, especially if you're an MIT grad. So internally, if the sentiment after any interaction between one of us and the company is negative relative to the trending sentiment that we have, we pass. So we're of the mindset that if all four of us aren't continually getting more excited about something, or at least maintaining the level of excitement we have, again, qualitatively, totally judgmental, we stop. And part of the reason we approach it that way is we can only make 10 new investments or so a year based on our fund size, the number of us, et cetera, and we probably have several hundred things a year that sort of get past the initial screen of it's in a theme, and then get past that we're interested in it, the people and product. And that's how we do it. And it's fascinating because it's a completely, it has become a very non-emotional dynamic. I'm not trying to convince my other three partners to do something that I really want to do that they don't. If somebody doesn't want to do something for whatever reason, okay, and vice versa. So you get rid of a lot of the nonsense that happens, and that, again, informed by past behavior. So that's how we do stuff, and it's been pretty satisfying.
So just a quick word on segmentation, because we ought to talk about sort of different forms of finance. So things like Kickstarter are, I think, as Brad and as we heard the product story here highlighted, the real strength about there is you're connected to people who are emotionally and to a certain extent financially invested in the product. And it's good for relatively short dollars, compared to building companies. And I totally agree about the marketing and the connections, they're incredibly powerful, but mainly focused on the product, right? Another source that's become transformative in recent years are individual angels. It used to be almost impossible to find individual investors. I'm going to assume most of you know what AngelList is? No. Okay, so fascinating. I thought the awareness was more. So just Google AngelList, angel.co, and this is a listing service of individual investors who will write individual checks into your company. It's kind of like Kickstarter, but with accredited investors. I assume we know that term? It's in the materials? Okay, look, accredited investor. Anyway, who will put money in your company. Pro about that? Well, it's actually the most recent, I think the only successful of like 20 years of attempts at trying to get online listing services for entrepreneurs. And what they got right was their signaling of trust. It's social network for angel investing. What you're really signaling is trust. The pro is you can find investors and people in other parts of the country or maybe even down the street you never would find before. The pro is they're willing to write relatively quick checks on relatively easy terms. The cons are they may not be around later. In fact, probably not. So it's great at very early alpha stages, but there's not a whole lot of continuity. Then you get into people like us who are organized. We start at $500,000. I don't want to go below $500,000, and typically more around $1.5 million to $2 million, so a little bit more serious capital. Companies formed, has beta, is ready to go to market, and all we do, our boundaries aren't thematic, our boundaries are geographic and stage. So New York to Boston, software, internet, right around go to market, late alpha, early beta, early launch. That's it. You are $500,000 million of trailing revenue, don't want to talk to you. You're in New Jersey, don't want to talk to you. Because again, it's similar sort of priority. Well, they're in New Jersey. This is being webcast, isn't this? Wrong state to offend. Anyway, but no, there are boundaries, right? Just because of logistical what you could do. And then there are small venture firms. Some are highly specialized, extremely focused, willing to go early. A little bit larger money maybe under management, but also limited capacity. And then you have really large venture firms. They may go early, but they need really big outcomes, really big platforms. So you have a little bit of that segmentation. So where do we get our deal flow and how do we operate? Well, one is from all those other players. We understand how we kind of fit together and where our boundaries are. So there are things I send Brad. There are things Brad bounces off me. There are individual investors say, I put $25,000 in this deal. James, I'd really like you guys to look at it. There are large venture firms that say, James, too early for us. We love the idea. We love the entrepreneurs. But our biggest struggle as a large firm is market size. We think this might be too small a market. Why don't you nurture this for a while and then maybe come talk to us later? So a lot of our deal flow comes investor to investor because, frankly, the search for capital is just really painful for entrepreneurs. It's just about money, and there's not enough clarity and transparency. And I hope you can realize I try to do my best to be as clear as possible and segment. The other is we just run a large network. Common Angels itself has a massive network. We have 68 active investors in our angel group, and we have again as many people in our fund. So the Common Angels total network is over 150 people. Most are in the Boston area, but we have investors from Oxford, England to Southern California, Colorado, Northern California, New York City, Florida, Vermont, and I'm probably missing a couple other places. Almost all leaders who are really well informed and connected and smart in the tech community. So that turns into, we get a lot of deal flow that, oh, so-and-so was my MIT student. They used to work for me. Well, our own investors are a source of deal flow because a third of them are just between gigs. They're serial entrepreneurs. So a lot of deal flow comes that way. But that also turns into the network, Karetsu, whatever, where we also can constantly refer in the family, oh, you need a hire, you need a connection, you want a manufacturer, you want a customer. And those connections happen with a little more friction than I'd like, but we're actually rolling out new software to make it happen better, but we'll see. So a little bit of under the hood with us.
So I think our process is very similar to Brad's. I would say in addition, well, where do the deals come from first? About half of them come from what we call our network. So that's somebody knows at Polaris. It's not necessarily that person, it's not my friend's idea, but it's someone that was referred by a friend. A quarter of them, so interestingly, a quarter of them come from other VCs, which we don't classify as friends, I guess, in our classification system. And about a quarter come from really cold calling. So interesting idea. You find it, you bump into it, you like it, and you just kind of try to weasel it.
Kickstarter.
Exactly, actually. A lot of, Kickstarter not yet, because the best idea I found there was a kit for championship lock picking. So that was not, even I'm smart enough to know, although it's not in biotech, that's not a good idea as an investment. And I would say in terms of thematic areas, each of the groups does have a thematic theme. We tend to be a little bit more focused on our themes as I think about them around business models, less so technology areas. So as an example, within life sciences, the two trends that we're very interested in right now are the fact that every one of us in this room is spending a lot more money on our healthcare than we have before. So you're watching this essentially capitalization of medicine. So you are now paying for it yourself. You're now going to care about it more. You're going to now go out and find out information about the options that are out there related to your medicine, and you're going to start making elective decisions. And you're watching that have a ripple effect all through the entire medical system. So we're investing a lot around that business model. We're investing a lot around the fact that MIT and other universities keep pumping out really beautiful biology, and pharma keeps kicking out their biology, keeps firing people, but they need to buy it. So, we're doing a lot of that kind of stuff, but it's really more around business model trends. And I think my partners on the technology side have a similar kind of attitude, which is there are business models that seem to make sense at any one time. The cloud obviously has changed the way you can build software companies for cheaper, freemium business models, the internet, Kickstarter, et cetera. So those are the themes we try to go after, but they tend to be around business model.
So you've got three very experienced, very smart guys taking different approaches to the investing things based on segment, geography, approach. It's a representative of when you're looking for money, understanding how these guys operate are really important, because if you take a deal that doesn't fit, you're wasting everybody's time. So there are ways to find that out. But we're running up pretty much near the end. I'd like our three investors, if you could give one piece of advice to the people in the audience for success, what would it be to wrap up? Obviously, I didn't rehearse this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, assuming you guys are all entrepreneurs, what we use and also for ourselves is this very simple theme that Darwin was an optimist. And the more you can actually bounce back and appreciate the pressures that are on you, appreciate the filters that are forcing you to be better than the organism sitting next to you, and push yourself to kind of achieve the things you wanted to set out to achieve, you will always find a better outcome. So we love selective pressure. We think there's a lot of selective pressure right now in venture capital firms. A lot of them are leaving the industry, and that's going to make for better venture investors. The same was true of entrepreneurs. The same was true of guys on Kickstarter, and the cream is rising to the top, and that's a good thing actually for everybody. So I think you should welcome selective pressure, because you're going to do great at it.
The green carpet in this room made me flash back to 6041, which was a class where I was like a week behind for the entire class. So I had my little anxiety attack from that. I believe that life is unpredictable in how long it is, and it's usually unexpectedly shorter than you want it to be, and it's very hard to predict what the outcome is, and the time frame is. And as an entrepreneur, it's incredibly hard to do what you do. And as a result, the thing that you're working on should be something that completely captivates your mind and imagination. I've had the fortunate experience of working with entrepreneurs and being a co-founder of companies where that was true. And those businesses, they go up and down and have challenges, are still awesome. Because the ups and downs and the challenges and all the stuff that you deal with, because you're so committed intellectually and emotionally to the thing you're working on, you're so passionate about it, you get through all that stuff. And it's not a truism, it's not sort of a trite statement, it just has to be where you are. I've also been involved in companies that weren't like that, including my first company, where in the 6th year I got very bored of it. And that amplifies how difficult it is by order of magnitude. And so my advice, because you asked for advice, is make sure the thing you're spending the vast majority of your working energy on is something that you are in love with, something that you can't get out of your mind, something that's important to you. And it doesn't matter what it means to anybody else in the world. It has to mean that to you. And I think that has a very significant correlation on your satisfaction with your journey, independent of whether or not it leads to success, because you're going to be spending your time on something that's meaningful to you, and not 6041. Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, too. So.
Well, and I think I'll be the one-note Jimmy here, because I started off talking about people and alignment of incentives, and that's still my advice. I mean, I think we all hold that to be true here from slightly different perspectives, because whether it's the customers who are passionate about your product or the entrepreneurs or your partners you're working with, all of this is done by people. We might innovate with technology and field it, but ultimately it's about people. And I do care a lot about the finance side. Call me, what I am. In fact, I went to that side of campus. But money is really just a fungible way to harness resources. But I've seen more, and so this is my word of caution that goes along with it, I've seen way more companies and founders hurt, damaged, or destroyed by misalignment with investors. And that's sometimes the commission of the founders making the initial mistake, or sometimes and having investors knowing what they're doing and sweet-talking them. But sometimes it's absolutely the opposite. It's the investors being kind of suckered in and getting outside their comfort zone and moving outside their boundaries. And what ends up happening is often a destroyed company. Sometimes one situation I'm close to right now, a prior company of founders involved in is filing an S1 and going public, but the founder's body is along the roadside, and figuratively. And they're having a lot of difficulty starting a new company because of what transpired. And I think he's a good guy. I think he's got a lot to offer. He's got a good skill set. So it's about people. It's about the negotiating and putting your expectations out in front, hence my question. And it's about aligning incentives. And you know what? If it fails along the way, at least you were clear about it, and you know why it failed. What's really tragic is when it fails because you weren't clear, and in hindsight you regret it, and then your hopes and dreams are dashed. And the fact that you lost some money along the way really is almost the least of those things. There'll be that tomorrow. So. Thanks for having us very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you. All these guys are really busy, all the investors, and I know you guys are in the middle of trying to get the product out the door. So when I invited you, I thought, God, I don't know if they're going to come given the schedule. So congratulations and good luck on that. And hopefully